Welcome to Stoic Conversations. My name is Michael Tremblay,
And I'm Caleb Ontiveros.
and today we are asking the question, should Stoics use AI? Framing for this episode, general topic or general question, but one that is interesting. As AI is becoming a bigger part of our lives, there are some people that are very pro, some people that are very against. And so looking at that through the lens of Stoicism, is it stoic to use AI? Is it unstoic? Is it in some ways harmful to the pursuit of an ethical, virtuous life? Or, is it just an indifferent? It just comes down to how you use it. These are the questions we'll be exploring today. And this is not the only time, we'll get into this shortly. This is not the only time that, philosophers or Stoics have written about advances in technology, kind of paradigm shifts, and also the way people relate to books versus discourse and dialogue versus lectures and other kinds of mediums of exchanging information. So we're kind of situating, at least in my notes, situating that in an ancient context of debate about the best way to engage with these new mediums as they come out, if you are a philosopher, if you're pursuing wisdom. So that's the framing for today. I think it'll be an interesting discussion because I'm personally pretty pro AI in some instances, and then I think I'm like most other people where it almost seems wrong or makes me uncomfortable to offload some aspects of my life to AI. It seems, I don't know, impersonal or something like this. But that's why I wanted to talk about this today. Anything you wanted to say, Caleb, by way of introduction?
Yeah, we're going to talk about AI as it exists today. I think the focus will be on specifically the tools that people have developed that's starting to enter our workplaces, personal lives, tools like ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, what have you. And as you say, philosophers have thought about technology. I think the Stoics have they've given us useful material to reflect on our use of AI, because I certainly think it's a kind of thing where, on one hand, people can get, as a society, just sort of go forward naturally, follow economic logic, as it were, and just introduce these sorts of tools without reflection, perhaps for economic reasons, perhaps for social reasons, whether it's positive hype or negative hysteria. But I think the Stoics help us step back a little bit and think about the nature of these tools and how they can be beneficial or harmful. So we'll do our best to touch on a few points here and there and talk also about how we personally use these tools, because I believe both of us do use AI tools fairly regularly. So,
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, we'll get into it, but in my work, we're really pushing the use and adoption of AI. I work as a consultant, and it's, I think, almost seen as like an existential imperative that we develop this capability to use AI, which brings up these really interesting questions, right? When you're paying people for expertise, what are you paying for? Are you paying for the idea generation? Are you paying for the capacity to look at what something like ChatGPT outputs and say, well, this part makes sense, this part doesn't. Kind of curate the output of AI. Is there something? Yeah, is there something less expert in curation than in generation? These kind of interesting questions that clients are wrestling with when they're deciding whether or not to allow the use of AI and from services and products. Cool. So I'll jump into it with the first idea. Um, so when should Stoics use AI? Big question. The first way I want to frame this is that ancient philosophy has always been concerned about things that provide the conceit of learning at the expense of learning. What that means is like they provide the appearance of having learned something, even though you haven't learned it. And I think that's a real risk. If you think about that from the Socratic context, Socrates has this idea of, at least I know that I know nothing. And this is the idea that's like, what's more dangerous than ignorance is the absence of the knowledge of your own ignorance, kind of overconfidence. And so I would say the kind of first counterpoint to should Stoics use AI, or the first counter argument is that, well, we need to be very careful that AI isn't making us overconfident, isn't making us into the kind of people that think we know things we don't know, or think we understand things we don't understand. Um, and I'll do this from, I'll take a passage from Plato's Phaedrus, which is a dialogue that this passage actually concerns the invention of writing, or the invention of the written word. And so it's kind of an interesting, because, we don't think of writing as being a bad thing for learning, but Plato at least here argues against it. And so in this passage, a little bit of context, somebody's presenting the written word as this amazing invention to a king. And then the king kind of pushes back against it and says, well, maybe this isn't as good a thing as you propose it to be. And so the passage goes, "Here, O king, is a branch of learning that will make the people of Egypt wiser and improve their memories. My discovery provides a recipe for memory and wisdom." This is the written word. "But the king answered and said, O man full of arts, to one it is given to create the thing of art, to another to judge what measure of harm and of profit they have for those that shall employ them. And so it is that you, by reasons of your tender regard for the writing, that it is your offspring, have declared the very opposite of its true effect. If men learn this, it will implant forgetfulness in their souls. They will cease to exercise memory because they rely on that which is written, calling things to remembrance no longer from within themselves, but by means of external marks. What you have discovered is not a recipe for memory, but for reminder. And it is no true wisdom that you offer your disciples, but only its semblance. For by telling them of many things without teaching them, you will make them seem to know much, while for the most part they know nothing. And as men filled not with wisdom, but with the conceit of wisdom, they will be a burden to their fellows." So lots of things to get into there. One, I love the way they open. So first, there's just that irony of like, well, written word is great, but there was this kind of concern about it. At least Plato's presenting here, and you could even see that as kind of a pro AI argument, because you could say, well, Plato was obviously so wrong about it, but I don't think that's charitable. I think he's raising a legitimate concern. And one part here also, they say, it's one job to create the art, it's another to judge if it's actually good or not. And that for me is your economic point, Caleb, of people that are making AI are just going to push ahead. They're going to create the new models. They're going to take this kind of expansionist perspective, but they're not the philosophers. They're not people thinking about, is this actually good for people? And the concern that Plato provides here is this distinction between reminder and recollection. Memory, which is I've internalized something, I understand something, I'm retrieving it, versus, I guess, reminder here, which is, oh, this has been written down for me, so I can kind of call it up when I need to, even though I don't really understand it. It's not really a part of who I am. And then that last point at the end where, there's people that are filled with the conceit of wisdom, not wisdom, and they become a burden to their fellows. And so that's that overestimation point I made at the start, where people think they know things that they don't actually know. And there's a risk there. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's well put. I suppose one takeaway from that passage is the practical one, which is that by externalizing learning, really, you're robbing yourself of an opportunity to learn yourself, and not internally building up a skill. And sometimes that's all right, but in other cases, I think that can really hamper. So I think a concrete example of this is use AI a lot in programming, and it is quite good at certain tasks. But something I've noticed with junior developers is that because they haven't developed as good of an intuition about code generally, sometimes they can push out a lot of stuff that isn't very good, and it might not be obvious to them that it's very good, that's given to them from an AI. And in a way, I think sometimes there's a risk that by not sitting down and trying to solve these problems that come up while programming, not getting there, not just diving into the code itself, trying to understand what's really going on, but instead, constantly asking ChatGPT, can you fix this bug? Can you fix this bug? What about this one that just came up? You're robbing yourself of a deeper understanding of how the code actually works. So I think that's how that's certainly a con, practically speaking, but perhaps Plato's getting at even something deeper here. What do you think about that?
I think that's exactly right. I think of all the, at least in the circles I'm in, there's all this education concern about students are basically going to university and they're using Chat GPT to get a bunch of B's. I haven't been to university in a while, but I don't even know how you would. I remember grading undergraduate essays, and they are not discernible from the output of the a B or a C essay is not discernible from the quality that these large language models are capable of producing now. They're probably better, more coherent than some of the more challenging essays I've graded.
More
Um,
challenging.
challenging to parse. You always think, people think like, I'm not happy to have a bad essay. It's like, I want this to be a good essay. I want to say good job and give you a good grade and move on. Um, and so, yeah, you're pointing to this kind of opportunity cost, where I think there's the 2 points. There's the opportunity cost, which is you had an opportunity to learn and you didn't do it. I think of the difference of, like, if you're asking ChatGPT, hey, how do I cook this? Or how do I do this thing every single time, instead of actually like internalizing it and gaining that knowledge, use the coding example. But then the other thing is that kind of conceit, which is the deeper point I think Plato's making, which is the risk of thinking, so the junior developer that thinks they know how to code because they produce something, half decent or passable with the support of ChatGPT or one of these models, that is more dangerous than the person who's like, I have no idea what I'm doing. That's why I'm almost like, no idea what I'm doing, but at least I'm using this as a tool. But I don't think I can do this. I know that I need the tool, and so I think that's a danger. And so when Plato's talking about the written word, it was this. It was like, yeah, you can recite the line, but are you reciting the line because you've internalized it or because you looked at your book in your hand? And if you think those are the same thing, that's the real danger. So yeah, that for me is the deeper point. And so if we come back to a Stoic to avoid this, I think writing is a really good tool to avoid this. I think things that require kind of internalization and knowledge, talking about things with friends, there's all these ways that you can build this that don't require it. I think I see a lot people kind of typing things into ChatGPT and thinking, oh, I've gotten a good answer, or I know what the Stoics think because this answer's come up. But like the coding example, they don't have the expertise to understand that this was like a misinterpretation or something along these lines. But I think also just in your domains, if you're a Stoic, you're pursuing excellence and mastery in your roles, and there's a risk of not doing that if you outsource too much of your thinking or mastery to one of these pieces of technology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I talked about this some with Andrew Perlot in the episode 197, especially around memory, perhaps, and some of the risks of downplaying the importance of memory. I think I mean, that's what Plato's concerned about with writing, is that by having a tool you can refer to in case you've forgotten something, you're not going to be able to remember it when that tool isn't present. And so it's not perhaps a part of your character, as it were, or not a part of you in the way that knowledge is perhaps a more classical way to put it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also this great example from Seneca. Seneca talks about a certain rich man, Calvivius Sabinus, and he's the fellow who got a bunch of his slaves to memorize Homer and Hesiod so that if he had forgotten something, he could just refer to them and take pride in the fact that because his slaves were his, he in fact remembered Hesiod and Homer and so on. And I think that's sort of perhaps a useful example about how just by externalizing memory in this case, you don't actually build knowledge, of course.
Yeah, this makes me think of one of the key insights of Stoicism is that we often ascribe values to proxies or symbols that kind of represent or correlate with the things that are actually valuable. We love great people, and so we praise beautiful people because we see that as a proxy for being great or good. And so we ascribe this value to beauty. And then the Stoics come along and say, well, that's actually not a very good proxy. That's actually not a very good symbol. And so now you love beautiful people, you stress about your beauty, but what's really mattered all along was your goodness. And what is goodness? It's your character, your virtue, your knowledge. And it makes me think of this where, so Seneca's example is, you think we praise smart people. Smart people are ones that can recite Homer on demand. And he's developed this method of getting his slaves to recite Homer on demand. And he goes, look, praise me. And it's like, well, no, that's actually a bad proxy. You've kind of got the point confused. And so maybe that's the risk with, that's a risk with AI is we want to value as Stoics knowledge. We want to value as Stoics people that think carefully, that really understand the world and their place within it. And so we value, I don't know, the capacity to come to answers. We value the capacity to generate information. And so the AI kind of generates that, does that for us. And we can say, look at the information, look at how my ability to generate it. And I think the Stoic has to say, well, okay, that can be useful as a tool, but we're really interested in your ability to kind of do that on your own, your ability to have these kind of epistemic skills of your own, of being
Mm-hmm.
able to tell what's true and false, being able to come to good conclusions, to follow the rules of logic. And when you outsource that to an external thing, that becomes, again, like Epictetus would say, it's like you're praising, if someone has a great horse, that doesn't make them a good person. You praise the horse, not them. It's like if you have a good language model and a good ability to use it, that doesn't make you a good person or a smart person or an intelligent person necessarily. Yeah, so I think there's that issue of conflation that can occur, and I think it's going to get worse as as AI gets better, and as non-experts become. I think we're already at that point, but as non-experts get to the stage where they're unable to differentiate between experts and people using AI effectively, and both people are going to get the same degree of praise in a way. I think the Stoics would think there's something weird about that.
Yeah, maybe many so-called experts are also at that stage. But I really like this. I really like this phrase from Plato. What you have discovered is a recipe, not for memory, but for reminder. And I think that hits on what you just
Yeah,
said, and perhaps a Stoic angle on this, which is the highlighting the internal instead of something
yeah.
external like reminders and such,
Well,
which are indifferent. And I think what matters is of course how you use them, how you choose them, and such.
this kind of gets to my second point, which is that the Stoics have this metaphor. So that was kind of like the risk in general. Now, if we think about actual philosophy, like how does AI impact your philosophical life? Maybe it makes you a worse programmer. Maybe it makes you a worse economics student or something. And there's kind of risks to that. And you need to be careful. That point you made about, not recollection, but reminder, or remembrance, but reminder. Now, when it comes to our philosophical lives, our ability to understand Stoicism or become actual better ethical people, I think AI gets in the way of digesting theory, or might run the risk of getting in the way of digesting theory. And what digesting theory was, it's a metaphor that the Stoics used for actually internalizing what you've learned to the point of self-transformation. You eat something because you read a book. It's like you're eating that information, and then you need to transform it into muscle. It needs to be digested. It needs to enter your system. Otherwise, you're not. If you just vomit it back up, you're not rendering it valuable to you. And so I'll do an Epictetus quote here. This is from Discourses 3.18. And Epictetus says, "Those who have learned precepts as mere theory want to vomit them up immediately, just as people with weak stomachs do with food. Digest your precepts first, and you'll not vomit them up in this way. Otherwise, they really do turn to vomit, tainted matter unfit to eat. Then show us some change that results from those precepts in your own ruling faculty. Just as athletes can show their shoulders as the results of their training and diet, or those who have learned various arts can show the result of their training. A builder does not come up and say, listen to me lecturing on the builder's art, but acquires a contract to build a house and shows by building it that he knows the art. And you should likewise eat as a man, drink as a man, adorn yourself, marry, sire children, play your part as a citizen. Put up with abuse, bear with an inconsiderate brother, bear with a father, bear with a son, neighbor, fellow traveler. Show us these things so that we can see that you have in truth learnt something from the philosophers. And so Epictetus' point there about digestion is you show you've digested and understood Stoicism in your actions, in your behavior, not in your ability to recite theory, not in your ability to lecture on theory. And so I think when we get in, I think there's a danger in AI, using AI too much, either in philosophical development or in ethical development, about not having to kind of wrestle with these theories yourself. It's just like, what do the Stoics think on X? Okay, it generates it. Okay, now I understand it. But it kind of, that's not understanding, as we were just getting to. And you don't demonstrate that understanding without going out and acting on it. I think also debating with people, having conversations like we're having, you've got to really internalize it and make it part of your character. And I just think the simplicity at which you can generate an incredibly complex response using these large language models can maybe risk people skipping this step, risk people generating their own ideas, really wrestling with the theory and starting to internalize it. What do you think about that?
Oh yeah, I think that's correct. That's totally correct, and very useful Epictetus quote for this context. I suppose there are really different levels to it. At first, you're using AI sort of in a consumptive way, where you simply ask a question, get an answer, and that can certainly be useful for many tasks. But there's this risk we're hitting on, where look, you're just not building that ability to generate an answer yourself. That's sort of one level, and then you can say, well, to fix that problem, I'll focus more on learning in unpleasant ways, maybe by using AI or with others. And I think something that can be useful is to answer the question yourself and then say, what's wrong with this? Or how can I make this answer better with an AI? That's something worth trying. But of course, then there's another level still where Epictetus might say, it doesn't matter, even if you can capture Stoic theory perfectly. What ultimately matters is your actions, of course. But nonetheless, I think perhaps there's that halfway step where you are learning theory. It's important to learn theory, and perhaps you can do that in a more constructive way with AI tools in a way that demands more thought on your own side. So I think that's perhaps something positive we can say here, is that this sort of consumptive model where you're just consuming whatever the AI feeds you, perhaps not so good. But if you ask the AI to tell you what's wrong about what you just said, quiz you, or this sorts of things, then at least you're making more progress, even if it's not sort of the ultimate destination of philosophy.
Yeah, and then there's that last point, which is that you're going to have to get off the computer.
Yeah.
But that's no different than their criticism of books, right? You have to put the book down at some point. Any other tool for learning is only so good insofar as it prepares you for going out and doing things courageously, justly. And if it limits that, then it's an issue. But same argument against books, same argument against YouTube videos or podcasts or any other form of consumption. And that kind of connects me to my last point. I try to really paint the anti-AI picture. Not like, oh, this technology is new and that's intimidating, but really what is AI replacing? It's replacing the kind of generative, for me, AI is like it's a web scraper as it currently exists. It has an incredible capacity to scrape the web, and then it has an ability to like generate content. And I think by outsourcing both this research and this generation capacities, we run these risks of thinking we're smarter than we are, know more than we do, which is the argument I tried to make. But my third point is ultimately AI is an indifferent. It's an external. What matters is how it's used. The Stoics the Stoics call death an external. They call torture indifferent. If torture and death are indifferent, then certainly AI is, even on the most negative reading of any of this, even on the most cynical reading of it. It matters how it's used, and you need to engage with it intelligently and skillfully and maximize the benefits while downplaying the downsides. Um, and with that perspective in mind, I think the ultimate Stoic advice would be to gain literacy, get a sense of what it can do and can't do, and be wary of the risks, and then use it intelligently, which is kind of boring common sense, but that's the insight behind indifference.
Yeah, I think this connects to one of my points. So we each just jotted down some topics to talk about, which was sort of modeling AIs as assistants or servants. And perhaps that gives I think this could be a useful, concrete way to think about where AI tools can help or harm. So the Calvisius Sabinus example, I think, is a great example of how not to use servants. But at the same time, if you have access to a lot of servants, and especially with AI, you remove some of the ethical questions around using other servants to do particular tasks. You just have these artificial agents. Now you can get a lot more done, perhaps even things you couldn't do yourself, but you certainly can speed up some of your own work, especially if you're doing some kind of knowledge work or software type work. Now you can get a lot more done with these AI services, agents, and so on than you could previously. So, in the same way, you could get a lot more done if you had a bunch of servants in hand. And I think if you think about some of the pros of having lots of assistants at hand, you can certainly get more done. Maybe some assistants have novel skills that you can use for your particular circumstance. But at the same time, assistants are not a magic bullet. If you externalize too much, you might lose a sense of what you're working on, what's actually happening. Even the best CEOs realize they can't. They need to manage delegation with jumping into the details and so on. And I think that there's something similar here, where using AI tools just to set up some process, you still need to master the details quite often. So, but I'm not sure if I stated that as well as I wanted to, but I feel like maybe
Well, what's if we got to the heart of it, what's the issue with the slave example? And then I guess what's the comparison to AI? What's the negative use case? The negative use case is like you lose a kind of strategic oversight of what's going on or what the craft is, or if you really understand the craft, then you can understand where this tool fits into it. If you rely on these tools too heavily, you kind of lose sense of the big picture. Was that your argument?
yeah, loose sense, probably both the big picture and perhaps the small picture
All the
as
pictures.
well. Yeah. But if you're thinking about, in the case of uh, Sabinus, what's she trying to do? Well, he's maybe just trying to show off his learning and also entertain his guests. But Seneca says, he made the life miserable for his guests, and uh, perhaps miserable for his slaves as well. And unless it was some sort of power move on his part, wasn't accomplishing what he originally set out to do. And I think that's maybe that case of failure is obvious, but perhaps there's more subtle cases of failures. I mean, I think about this quite often in hiring, where people think we just need to hire more people, and that sort of becomes a solution to a problem that demands more thought and reflection. It's sort of a way of pushing back problems, and perhaps you see similar issues with AI. We just need to add AI to this process and speed things up, or we need to, without thinking about what's worth solving to begin with, or what's worth doing to begin with in the business context.
Yeah. So good thinking. If I try to summarize that, good thinking is like kind of maybe systems based. Like it has a few. It's not just like upping the firepower. It's not just upping the processing. It's a sense of the task we're undertaking. It's a sense of what's important. Maybe it's like a craft based view of things. And if you have a craft, you really understand how everything fits together at a high level, and you're maybe not adopting that craft based view. If you're like, oh, I just need, um, I'm having trouble. I'm having trouble with my workout plan. I just need AI to like tell me exactly what to do every day. Well, maybe there's some benefits to that, but um, maybe that's like you're kind of like thinking of the problem as that like I don't have enough servants basically. And if I, as you said, if I had 1,000 servants, all my problems would be gone. But we know that the problems are, there's a problem in terms of what we ask the servant to do. There's a problem in terms of how the servant should fit into your system, so to speak. And I guess a good Stoic understands that, or thinks at that level,
Yeah,
something
and I
like that.
suppose, yeah, some maybe also I think specifically with this example, it's introducing AI tools is similar to introducing other people or other agents. I wouldn't want to take that too far, that analogy too far, but so perhaps single player crafts aren't the best analogy, but I do think multiplayer games, crafts, and perhaps that's why I keep on coming back to company related or business related examples can be useful, because there you do see the pros and cons of bringing on an additional person to a team or outsourcing some service to a third party, where you I think you need to be these sorts of questions come up around orchestrating these different parties well, and being able to do that with assistants, AI assistants in this case. It is a skill of itself. And there's questions about when do you go to the AI assistant? How do you monitor them? How do you judge their output? And so on. So yeah, I still like to feel like this isn't quite as tight as I want it to be, but uh, I think the assistant analogy works because there's like different tools at play with their own skills and affordances and such.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. I mean, maybe I'm not. Maybe what I'm thinking isn't exactly what you're trying to communicate, but um, the Plato example was this kind of like rote memorization, right? It's like don't just repeat a line, know the line. And like, if I just have the lines written down on a piece of paper or a poster on my wall, I don't know them. I'm just able to look at them and say them. And that's different. And I'm thinking this is kind of like the same argument, just kind of a level up, which is like, don't just like bring on more assistants or people. Understand the craft, understand what you're aiming to do and the role those people play. And you can kind of, if you think, oh, I just need, if I just had AI automating this, everything would go, my workflow would be so much smoother. My day would be so much more efficient. And there's that kind of, by just thinking about the problem as one of scale, and then AI as an ability to kind of like increase the scale or automate things, you're, I don't know, you're kind of walking away from the systems level thinking, or walking away from like really what's important or essential, which is partly Stoic, but partly just good thinking, right? And the Stoics were
Mhm.
good thinkers, which they would be against anything that encourages lazy thinking or kind of incorrect thinking.
Yeah.
That's the way I'm thinking about this.
No, I think that's well put. Yeah, that's really well put. Cool. So, and I think that this line of thought points at some of the positives as well of the risks of using AI. Positive because you can solve problems perhaps you weren't able to solve before. As a society, we might find particular innovations the AI allows us to unlock, perhaps in the scientific domain or otherwise. But of course, there's also going to be issues with managing the performance of these systems and how we integrate them into our own social groups and so on.
Mm.
Um, cool. So one other thought I had, I think you'll probably agree with this, but I'll be curious if you take the opposite side, which I think Stoics would be against AI friends, and in particular, the use of AI that's modeled closely as a person that you interact with on a day-to-day basis. Perhaps there's some in-between examples that'd be fine with, but I wrote this piece recently called The Age of Sirens on Stoa Letter, which is specifically focused on grok and these sort of very visual, seductive AI type characters that you talk to purely for entertainment. I think on one hand, there's the obvious argument, which is that this is distracting, not really focusing on anything particularly important. It's pure entertainment and would have some of the similar arguments against it the Stoics gave against pure spectacle, and whether it's in the gladiatorial arena or what have you. So I think there's that kind of argument, but I think there's also this thought that AI relationships just are fantasy. They're a simulation of something that's not real. They're not as valuable as the thing itself. And if anything, they should really play to the extent that they're trying to substitute for the value of a real relationship, they're not advisable, and Stoics would be against that.
Yeah, I think that's right. The one interesting idea here is that the Stoic argument for friendship, you sometimes see, I don't have my exact sources down, but some people say that the Stoics refer, like some ancient sources say that the Stoics refer not just to virtue as a good, but also even true friendship between two virtuous people. Because with true friendship, then you're like admiring virtue. Like that's what makes friendship good, is like seeing the virtue in the other person and admiring it and understanding it. It's like you're not doing that with an AI agent. You're not admiring virtue because there is no virtue. You're not fulfilling your role because you have no sort of ethical obligations or responsibility to an AI agent. So it is just the hedonistic function. It's just you find it pleasurable or enjoyable. And then I think the point you raised, which is like it's kind of a more dangerous kind of hedonism, because I'm not saying hedonism judgmentally, it just means you're just doing it because you find it fun. And it's a more dangerous kind of fun because it's a replacement. Um, I'm not the biggest fan of these kind of arguments always. Like I always roll my eyes. I play a lot of video games and I roll my eyes at the kind of idea that, oh, video games are some sort of replacement for real life accomplishment or achievement. You're replacing your human or masculine desire to go out and win the battle and conquer the war with this like online simulation of war or something like that. And I think those arguments are kind of out of touch a bit. You can always take something to an extreme, and I think, but maybe that's the difference between an AI for fun and like an AI friend. Maybe that's the extreme. If you're like, this is actually my friend, this is actually my person I go to for advice, this is actually my person that I go to feel better or to like emotionally regulate. Maybe once you cross over from like, this is kind of a fun thing to play around with or joke with or test the limits of, to this is a companion, maybe that's when it becomes dangerous and goes too far. I'm just trying to reconcile the fact that I agree with you, but I don't find these arguments compelling with things that I enjoy. So like, I don't know, am I a hypocrite? Is there a type difference? So the argument was that there's a type difference with AI friendship because friendship is a thing you do specifically with a person, where something like achievement or accomplishment, you can do that with a game. That's fine.
Yeah, I think there's perhaps with games you have sometimes, I think the sort of what's valuable about video games isn't the video game itself, but if you think about relationships, real relationships can be created by video games, and that's was certainly underrated by many of the early criticisms of video games. But also there are specific skills you can develop within a video game, and then just the point of achievement itself that might be worth doing, and the appreciation of a kind of the work that went into the video game. I think there's a whole range of ways one could appreciate video games in that sense. And perhaps there's something you could do the same on AI. But I think to me, the value for AI friends can't be in companionship. It has to almost be in something novel that these tools provide, which perhaps I just haven't seen that voiced well yet. But it can't just be companionship, engagement. It has to be something
Yeah, yeah.
perhaps like in the video game case where you realize, oh, people do create real relationships in these online games.
Yeah, I understand this. The point is like, look, well, we haven't explored with this enough. We're not 100% sure that there's no value here. But if there is value here, it's not from friendship because it's not real friendship. It's a simulation of friendship. It's a simulacrum of friendship. Maybe there's some other value. It's, you know, self-discovery. It lets people explore themselves. It lets people develop their thinking in a safe space or something. I don't know, but it's not from friendship because that's just you're not getting that here, and there's a danger to to thinking that a simulation of it is the real thing.
Yeah, I think so. And perhaps it's a useful training for the real thing.
Yeah, the big theme of this episode is the we got to end on something that isn't hitting on the nerds. I feel too bad about like the people with AI friends, so they're already down. Caleb, we don't want to hit them any.
Yeah, that's true. Um, well, one positive aspect of AI that I perhaps haven't made too coherent yet, but here's one thought that you can think of it as a mirror of the logos. So Cicero has, he's the best person I could find this line of thought, but I think you see it in other Stoics as well. This idea that you can see nature itself in technology. It's not just an appreciation of nature. You know, there's that fantastic passage from Marcus Aurelius where he's meditating on the flecks of foam in a boar's mouth and seeing that too has its own kind of beauty in terms of how it's connected to everything else. But in technology itself, you can see a kind of beauty and the order of things. So Cicero uses this as an argument for design. You know, when you see a sundial or water clock, you see that it tells the time by design and not by chance. How then can you imagine that the universe as a whole is devoid of purpose and intelligence when it embraces everything, including these artifacts themselves and their artificers? I think this is one way to take this sort of line of thought in this context is as an appreciation really of the technological accomplishment of these LLMs, and perhaps a reminder to think about how their structure, maps onto certain forms of reasoning itself, and there's a kind of value in that. What do you think about that?
I like that. I like that idea of it's. I mean, I think it's funny that Cicero's example was a sundial, and our example is a, AI. We've come a long way, Cicero. Um, but I love that idea of um, the universe embraces everything, including these artifacts themselves and their artificers. There's a beauty to the human mind, and AI is not replacing the human mind, but it's able to kind of simulate certain aspects of our reasoning and our thinking in ways that we haven't been able to do before. Um, that's a really cool thing. I guess it's just a more optimistic view after being pessimistic, right? It's a really cool thing. There is like risk involved. We don't know what's going to land with certain career paths. We don't know what it's going to do to the educational experience of high schoolers. There's risks that come with this stuff, but we have been able to create something that more closely simulates interacting with a person than has ever been done before, and interacting kind of the logical thinking process of a person than has been done before. And there's something beautiful about that. It's not, it's not like trees are beautiful and then concrete is ugly. The Stoics they're more, they think nature is beautiful, but then they also think the products of humans are also part of nature. They're part of the universe. The universe contains everything. And so there's something to be appreciated about them as well. I just think it's a good reminder not to be like Luddite about this, or not to entirely reject it. There's risks; they should be acknowledged, both for being a Stoic and for otherwise. But incredible human accomplishment um, that we will benefit from.
Yeah, absolutely. So the last point that I wanted to hit on is thinking about the virtue of prudence. I think ultimately, whether you should consider AI or not depends on your situation. And the Stoics are excellent about reminding us to, don't make the mistake of worrying about something that's completely out of your control, whether it's the development of AI, economic trajectories, geopolitical events, what have you. But at the same time, depending on your circumstance, it might be a mistake to, be completely passive about developments in this arena and ignore developments of AI when they could be useful either to your work life or personal life. But I think there's always that turning back to the Plato that we began with. Prudence is something that needs to be internal, but it shows itself through how you make decisions regarding the external world. And I think what the Stoics give us is, of course, that focus on the internal. And if you think about prudence itself, not making the mistake of worrying about things that are completely out of your control, but at the same time, not being passive when some of these things do become relevant to you and you need to make decisions about them. So that's not any specific guidance, but I think it's probably an essential reminder and something that I keep on thinking about. What does prudence look like in my personal life, work life with these kinds of tools?
Yeah, it comes back to my same indifferent point, and it's boring in a way because it's not this controversial position. Yeah, you've got to be prudent. You've got to be careful in how you use it. Watch out for the risks. Lean into the benefits. But I think the something that comes from prudence though is I think you have to kind of engage with it. You should become literate in it, because you can't use it prudently if you don't understand it. And so I think that's like the learn a bit about it. If you're not using AI yet, say use it more. If you are using it, be prudent about how you're using it and the role that it's taking on in your life, and watch out for these dangers, especially around kind of overconfidence, or around replacing things that are better acquired outside of AI. Friendship as an example, but maybe advice about certain things as well. And all of that requires prudence. So you can use AI as it's an indifferent. It's an opportunity to exercise your virtue. So don't just ignore it, but exercise your prudence in figuring out how to use it well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really an empirical matter. If you haven't played with these tools, you probably should. That's perhaps not true for everyone, but it's true for many. And that'll give you a better sense of the limitations, risks, and benefits.
Yeah, I think it's really cool. I think for me, last non-stoic closing thoughts on AI. I'm at the age where this is kind of the first major technology shift. And so maybe some of our listeners have gone through a couple of those before. Like I'm sure plenty of people listening are like pre-internet. I'm just at that age where I can remember not having internet, but basically had it all through high school and, a little bit before then. So I wasn't there with this like major paradigm shift. And it's exciting to see how it pans out. Which parts of its benefits are over exaggerated and which parts of its benefits are not discovered yet, and which parts of its risks will turn out to be the right ones. But I think we know for certain that the stuff we said today of, use it, exercise prudence, understand the role it should have in your life. And, if your goal is knowledge and virtue, be careful about ever outsourcing any of those to something else. That's something that you have to develop yourself as a Stoic.
Excellent. Well said. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Gil.
Thanks for listening to Stoic Conversations. If you found this conversation useful, please give us a rating on Apple, Spotify, or whatever podcast platform you use, and share it with a friend. And I'd like to thank Michael Levy for graciously letting us use his music. Do check out his work at ancientliar.com. And please get in touch with us at stoameditation.com if you ever have any feedback or questions. Until next time.